I used to like to think that I was a rational person. I understood rationality as a state of being. People were either rational or they weren't. Eventually, I came to realize that rationality is a process that requires discipline. It's grounded in logic, reasoning, and validity. Just because we perceive something a certain way doesn't mean our conclusions are based in any sort of rigorous process. Humans tend to rely more on heuristics to guide decision making, which is a practical approach to problem solving for reaching immediate conclusions. An example of this would be if I ate a red berry, I got sick, so I assume every other red plant or berry will also make me sick. This sort of thinking is useful when finding an optimal solution is impractical, or when we just need a quick solution. Most of the time, people don't need an optimal solution because heuristics have good enough results for the moment, and then we don't really think about it too much because the situation is over with. When it comes to things like understanding words and concepts, we mainly rely on associations, context, and what things represent to us. Doing this gives us a good enough understanding to use words to express ourselves and pass on info, but just like any other heuristic technique, it doesn't guarantee an optimal, perfect, or even rational understanding. It just allows us to navigate social interactions. As long as our word usage allows for smooth social interactions, we tend to not feel as if we need to understand words from an official definition standpoint. This creates a dynamic where words have entirely different meanings outside of the official dictionary definition that changes from one community to the next. Some communities have entirely different meanings for established words and even terms that don't show up in the dictionary at all. Because of this reality, what things represent to us end up being more important than what they actually are. Sometimes we make the mistake of not considering that the meaning we project on something may be different than another person. I constantly see this mistake being made in the comment section of anything that even remotely has anything to do with socialism. Depending on a person's background, they may come to have a very different understanding of this topic and place very different meanings on the word. Some people think socialism just means taxes and the government providing public services. Other people understand the term as an economic model that emphasizes worker and community control of the means of production through things like unions, cooperatives, or the government. For one side of this topic, the concerns are about perceived threats to freedom, personal responsibility, and the fear of having the same economic realities as a certain South American country. For the other side of this topic, the concerns are about corporate accountability and decreasing the meaning of class by creating a dynamic where everyone can have access to things like a livable wage, adequate healthcare, and the education required to be competitive in today's job market. There are real fundamental differences between one side of this topic versus the other, but it is important to realize when we're dealing with an actual fundamental difference and just culturally driven language differences. There's a huge common ground that I noticed that many left-leaning people miss when talking to people who lean more to the right on these sort of things. Crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is an economic system characterized by close, mutually advantageous relationships between business leaders and government officials. An example of this would be the Congress to lobbyist revolving door. A member of Congress can leave office, almost immediately take a position as a chief lobbyist, and then make a whole lot more money working for the corporation. Former members of Congress are the most attractive for these roles because they have connections in the government that a typical lobbyist wouldn't have. Now I know that some of you may be rolling your eyes over me calling this shit crony capitalism because you may see this as a feature of capitalism and not just a type of capitalism. You may understand these relationships as being the result of corporations trying to find workarounds for laws and regulations that put a damper on unchecked capitalism. I'm personally inclined to agree with this understanding, but we have to keep in mind that the goal is to curb these dynamics. It's not about getting everyone to use terms that we think are the most correct. There are plenty of right-leaning people who are against the negative aspects of capitalism, but many people still get defensive when they hear a lot of these critiques. Some people see anti-capitalist rhetoric as an attack on them and their entire existence because they may be a small business owner or aspire to be one. Some people come from communities that prime them to see leftist politics in general as radical or communism. Other people may think being critical of capitalism means advocating for some sort of government overreach that stifles personal freedom somehow. There are a lot of reasons why left-of-center economics intimidates people, and we need to keep this in mind. More recently, I've seen people use terms like patriot care as a joke to suggest that conservative voters would be more supportive of some sort of public healthcare system if it was just called something else. I personally don't think anyone should mock people for this because it is true and applies to any demographic. This doesn't just apply to the Trump supporters who benefit from the Affordable Care Act but are against Obamacare. Instead of poking fun at people for being affected by framing, we should just take time to understand it, how it affects us, and try to use it for good. The term supercapitalism was once trending on Twitter. This is pretty much just a rebranding of left-wing economic policies catered to conservative tastes. It takes the focus away from things that typically offends conservatives like social justice and frames everything in terms of getting fuller participation in the economy. This term is a great example of what I mean by using framing for good. People are making the end goals and benefits of socialism the focus instead of wasting time trying to define it for people who have their mind made up. Many people actually do support leftism. I'd go as far as saying leftist ideals are more universal than caring about something like social justice because it's a lot easier to outline issues caused by unchecked capitalism than it is to get people who enjoy certain social privileges to realize anything about their existence. Even most Fox News watching bootstrappers can at least acknowledge that corruption shouldn't be legal, monopolies are bad, and that there should be at least some sort of accountability for corporations. There's actually quite a bit of common ground here. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and turn on all notifications. If you want to learn more about the Congress to Lobbyist revolving door I mentioned earlier, check out this documentary on Amazon Prime if you have the time. It's called Big Money Agenda: Democracy on the Brink. This documentary outlines how capitalistic interests are currently undermining our democracy. It is also available on Vimeo if you don't have access to Amazon's streaming service. I'll put the links in the description.